This question is from Zainab Sawati. She asks, when women make mistakes, she is always blamed for being women. But when men make mistakes, they are not blamed for being male. How to keep this balance in common household?
Well, I think we can look into a little bit of a history as to how the cultural constructs come into play. This is a very cultural issue, even though I can actually blame it in the neo or postmodernistic leftist radical philosophy has to start the collective identity and identity politics, and that's what they're playing all over the world, and that actually produces or begets this sort of a philosophy underneath, and that's why people actually go through a certain judgment of the whole group, based on whatever an individual is committing. And this is what collective identity is, and this is what group politics is actually all about. And this is where you can see the transgender issues being highlighted in North America right now. And this is the same sort of approach that actually begets these kind of logical and psychological fallacies. When you look at the distribution of intelligence compared to male and female, you will see that cognitively, women are by no means inferior to men. Intelligence is equally distributed based on regardless of the gender. But it's a cultural construct which has come from a history of how women have never been able to take part in a lot of those opportunities which men have been a permanent feature in. So when you look at the whole, the way women have actually come to this point in time where they are now more participative in a lot of masculine roles, you can see that just like any other competence or any other construct of psychology, women are actually learning as a whole and how to actually go about their mistakes and correct them, and they're making many, and that's what men did when the whole age of industrialization came into being. You had to come up with philosophies like Taylorism and Maoism, because men were making all of those mistakes. At that time, men were actually judging other men based on their socioeconomic background and attributing intelligence based on the SEC. That's exactly what goes on. When something new is tested, people tend to take their time learning. And this is what the professional racket actually looks like. And that's the reason why it looks like the way it looks like. And when men actually have a more judgmental point of view. But that's what they had for other men. And if you read Taylorism, you'll understand how management psychology came about based on the pre-assumptions that the working class is going to fraudulently overcast their work and still call it fair. And that's how Taylorism was introduced globally. In Japan and China still practices Taylorism in their management philosophy. And this is what begets the local psychology of the cultures. And this is where we actually get the fruit of how we look down upon women, and we do. There's no doubt about this. We do look down upon women as a community, and we expect more mistakes and lesser competence. But that's because women have not been practicing the kind of art and science that men have been able to do for a few hundred years now. But domestically, there is a far superior level of competence of women because they've been there for thousands of years, and that doesn't really, drop the payload of this philosophy inside the household. Not as much as in the professional racket anyway. But the psychology is still the same, and it comes from the outside and an external influence, which is induced internally, and those kind of judgments are passed. Now, is it right? Of course, it's not right. But can it be fixed? Of course, it can be fixed. It's going to take a little while. And more thought leadership by women is the only answer. You can see the history, all of the intellectual history is filled up by men. Not even an exception came about, unless, of course, the age of Islam came into being, and philosophers like Aisha radiallahu anha, who set off that the thought leadership are all women, and now half of the religion has come from a girl, and this is a clear evidence that cognitively women were as able and as competent as men. And in the first few hundred years of Islam, a lot of women thinkers came into influence, and they were actually a big evidence as to how, if given the liberty and enough time to practice that competence, men and women are going to be on the same scaffolding of this hierarchy of competence. But since, of course, industrialization and now the corporate culture, you cannot see that much of a proportion of women, and since they're not there that many, that means that unless, of course, they keep practicing that art, they're gonna have that sort of a sword hanging on their head all the time as to what kind of judgment is going to come about on any and every mistake. It's like any new sport that you try. It takes a little while before you start playing it at a level which is superior and recognizable at a global level.
Sahil, most of the time women are not given the opportunity to practice their intelligence. That's why this impression of lack of intelligence is linked with the women. How do you think that it is that women need to practice their intelligence without given the opportunity?
Well, first, yes, a very good question. Well, intelligence is practiced in every conference room. Okay, and even if you're a low-end wage worker who's doing something, you have to have some sort of a serotonergic reaction where you're being compared by your contemporaries. So intelligence is always practiced. It's going to take a little while, but the real problem is not the pedestal or the platform where they can practice intelligence. The platform of intellectualism was always there, but women technically didn't really show for it because of whatever reasons, and we can really argue for what the kind of reasons there were. But globally, you did not, even in the Western societies, you did not see more intellectualism filled up with the female gender, and still the top, shot callers of philosophy are still men. And even if there is an exception, that doesn't really account for all womanhood. So you have to have a lot more girls, directed towards deeper thinking, conscious thinking models, and try and make them practice this intellectual sport, so that their registry in the hierarchy of competence of intellectualism gets way more evident and visible. And that's where why do you think men do not think of a general man as a dumb man? Because there's so much evidence of intellectual men backing us up subconsciously that we just don't attribute to a gender. But since we do not have women, in that registry of intellectualism, practicing philosophy or arguing the thought of wherever they are, we somehow think of it as a very conspicuous matter when a woman becomes a decision maker, or she comes into the conference room. Her opinion is not well registered as a first mental response by the fellow men. So the more women are going to come into a deeper intellectual realm, it's going to pay off for all the other women who are in the corporate or the industry or academia, wherever they are. And even at low-end wage workers, you will see a lot of fruit reaped by a lot of other women. But someone's got to take, that first draft of being that first draft of women who are thoroughly intellectual. And that's the only answer I can actually give you, because it's a slow process, but it has to start somewhere and sometime. And we need to breed this faculty, cognitive faculty. And for our daughters and our dependents, we need to focus on intellectual acumen and intellectual equity to be given equally to women. Actually, in this case, we have to give a bigger piece of the intellectual pie to our daughters, so that since they're not getting any right now, so that they can actually come into the level playing field, and they can actually practice shaping the whole planet.